Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our, I think by now already third webinar. We've been running these webinars for a couple of weeks now as part of our call for applications, and we try to answer kind of like basically the most important topics that are coming up in questions from applicants. Today, we're going to talk about revenue-based financing. I think this is something where we received quite a couple of questions, understandably so. I think it's nothing that has been around for too long. So we're going to cover that topic today. I'm Franziska. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Uncap. Some of you know me already from last time. With me, I have my colleague, Esther. I think most of you know her by now already as well, if you joined the webinars before. I think, Esther, you have been in both of the webinars before. Esther is our investment lead. She joined us 6 weeks ago. Feels longer in a good way. And Esther, you're gonna tell us a little bit more about the agenda, right?
Yes, and thank you for that introduction. And good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you're joining us from. Thank you for being with us today for the third office hour. I'm just talking about Uncap and what we do, and in this case, what revenue-based financing is all about. So in front of us is the agenda. Essentially, we'll cover three main areas. A quick overview about what RBF is, revenue-based financing. And in specific, how does Uncap's RBF model work in practice, which I think has been a question that has come up over the past two webinars, but also in various conversations and various emails that we've received the back end. And then lastly, we'll just open it up to, we'll discuss some common questions, but we'll also open it up to questions from the audience and really try to get into helping you understand this new model, this new investment instrument that is not quite common, as Franziska mentioned earlier. So the first slide essentially is, what is revenue-based financing? And what the slide says there is that it's normally known as royalty-based financing, a type of capital raising method which investors agree to provide capital to a company in exchange for a certain percentage of the company's ongoing total gross revenues. And that feels like a mouthful of many words. But essentially what RBF is an alternative growth investment structure with different mechanics, provisions, and return profiles than equity or traditional lending products. So it sits somewhere in the middle of the two. And who is it for? So it's designed for companies, and in our case, early stage companies that are seeking growth, but do not have, you don't have the current revenues, or rather the current revenue growth rates, or you don't have the scale, or, maybe even the interest to attract venture capital. Or on the flip side is that you lack the assets or you lack meaningful cash flows to be able to procure traditional lending, bank financing, for instance. So the key word here, I keep repeating, is growth. So RBF is an alternative growth investment structure. It's designed for companies that are seeking growth. We're thinking about revenue growth as one of the key metrics because essentially we are recouping the investment based off of your revenues on a monthly basis. But Franziska will take us deeper into what this looks like.
Thank you, Esther. So basically, we tried to give you, or we tried to put together an overview of something that Esther already hinted towards, like how does, and now this is like our revenue-based funding model, how does it compare to venture capital or to like debt or / bank financing? This is not a kind of like exhaustive overview. So it basically just kind of like hits on a couple of key points from our point of view. And so the first thing is like ownership. And when you're trying to attract venture capital, that usually means that most of the times you give up probably per round, like at least 20 to 30% of equity. And that means over time, you give up a significant portion of ownership. That's not necessarily bad, because usually it means also your company increases in value, but it still means that the control you have over the company usually decreases with every new round. On the other side, debt or bank financing, most of the times when we're talking about a traditional loan, you're not giving up any ownership, but as a security, the bank usually needs to see quite a significant collateral, so some some type of security that they can sell in the case of you going bankrupt. At Uncap, we do it a little bit differently. So we usually buy, with our investment, we buy, let's say, around 10% of your equity, but then this is something that you buy back over time. And that's very important, because that means you buy back your ownership, you buy back your control once you've paid back the investment. Second part, that's something that's obviously very important, I guess, to most of you, is like what are actually the costs. And I think this is something that is quite hard to compare, but important for you to get a better view on how does our option actually stack up to others. And for VC funding, I mean, there's no interest rate, right? Like usually you sell, let's say 20% of your company, for that you get an investment. But then at the moment where you're selling your company, or you're kind of like someone is acquiring a major stake, in that point in time, your investors are cashing out. And usually VC investors are betting on high growth companies. So they expect that at least one or two of their investments will generate 10x over time. So that means over a certain period of time, your value increases at least tenfold. But that also means that in the moment where you're selling your company, the stake of the investor is 10 times more valuable. So that means that they're kind of like getting 10 times their money back. And depending on the time, etc., this could sum up to something that's like over 100% annual interest. It's not really, we're not really able to compare to interest, but just to give you a sense that also equity funding is not, it's not for free. It's just that it doesn't have this kind of like explicit interest rate. Then debt, basically loan interest rates, I think they're very really by country, and it also depends on what type of loan you're seeking. I just kind of like talked to Isa about that again. In Kenya, I think it's around like 10 to 20%, but of course it also depends on what type of funding are you seeking. So if we're talking about microfinance loans, then usually the interest rates are much, much higher. At Uncap, there is no fixed interest rate. And this is also something we go a little bit deeper into later on. But basically how we work is that there is a multiple on your investment. So that means you get a certain investment, and then you're buying back that investment at a multiple on that investment through your revenues. So the interest rate depends on how long it will take you to buy back that investment. The third point, access. And I think this is something that's actually quite important, especially if you're comparing your options out there. And when you're thinking about what is the type of funding that suits me. Venture capital, I think has been around for a while now. It's all the craze. Everyone wants to be funded by a fancy VC. And I think many of them are doing a fantastic job. But I think what everyone needs to understand that venture capital is a very specific type of funding, suitable for a very specific type of company. So usually venture capitalists are looking for high tech, high growth companies that can return this kind of like 10x that we talked about before. Because usually when you invest in an early stage company, the risk of failure is really high, especially if you're investing in like a high tech company with a very innovative model. You just don't know if it works. So you need this kind of like one or two companies in your portfolio to return all the money that you're basically losing with the companies that are just not working. It also usually means that you need to have a good network. Like you need to know whom to talk to in order to be interested, or basically to get access to VC investors. Then that bank financing, I think this is quite a crucial point when comparing the options. Most banks are just not interested in early stage companies. because for them, the risk of an early stage company is just way too high. So, I mean, whenever they need to make a decision, they look at your company, and then they need to make a decision how likely is it that they will get their loan back over time. And as an early stage company, you usually don't have a collateral that could basically balance out that risk. And at the same time, very often you don't have a track record that is long enough that a bank trusts that you can actually return the money. So even we, as an early stage company in Germany, would not be able to get a bank loan at this point in our journey. On the other hand, Uncap, we are focused on early stage companies, and we are interested in kind of like a very diverse type of company. So the most important thing for us is that you have a scalable business model. And scalable in our case does not mean high tech, high growth over the next years, but it means that you can grow. And growing can mean that you grow from 2 employees to 20 to 200 or 2,000. The most important thing for us is that over time, you will be able to grow your revenues, to grow your company, and to buy back your shares through your revenues. In order to be able to offer a revenue-based financing, however, we need to see some revenue traction already. So at this point, we're not able to invest in idea stage only companies. And then last point, time and complexity. This is something that I think for founders is very important. Time is money. It's a kind of like a very cliche saying, but it is true. And at least I usually don't have the thinking that I have enough time. So when we're kind of like comparing the different options to each other, venture capital is usually quite a lengthy process. It means you need, like, first of all, you need to figure out who are actually the funders out there, how to get an intro to them. You need to have usually several meetings, a polished pitch deck, and then all of that makes sense, right? Because they're investing in a handful of companies, so they do a very in-depth and usually on or like offline and partly online due diligence on the companies they invest. And then if you're successful, there will usually be several rounds of contract negotiations about the valuation of your company, the type of control, the kind of like growth plan, etc. So it can be quite a lengthy process, and usually at least you're not talking to one investor only, but you probably need to talk to at least like 2 handfuls of investors. The second, that bank financing, I mean, if you're able to kind of like get a bank, get access to a bank that is willing to give you a loan, usually that's quite straightforward. There is a very standardized process, but there's lots of paperwork involved, lots of things they need to see. But in general, I think the timing and the complexity is quite okay. And then our process compared to that, I think all of you who have applied already know that it's kind of like a 7-step process. It's completely online. You can complete the process on your own time. Could be on a weekday, could be in the middle of the night, whenever kind of like you have the feeling you're in the right mindset. There's no need to meet anyone in person. There's no need to travel. There's no need to present a pitch deck. There's no need to write a business plan. And also the contract is highly standardized, very easy to understand. So we really try to take the time, the complexity out of this process as far as possible. I'm going to hand over to Esther now again, and she will give you an overview of how our model now works in practice.
Well, not in practice, but more like, here's a simple example of how Uncapped's RBF can work, right? So we have our entrepreneur, Mary Katenge. She runs an agri-business called Agritech Limited. Her funding need is $25,000. She makes her application through our platform, goes through the 7 steps, the various tests in it, does a complete thorough job of that, and gets selected through our algorithms and our technology built into the platform. And we invest in her $25,000, right? And so essentially, the first step, of course, is we take an equity stake into the business of 10%. And soon after, she starts making her payments based off of 5% of her monthly revenues. And the good thing is Francisca will show you sort of like what that looks like over a period of time. Also, what does it mean if your revenues go up and if they go down? What does that mean in terms of your payback on the monthly revenues? So essentially, your repayments are based on your cash flow. And if you would think what we've tried to do is really show you what that looks like. We have a pre-negotiated rate of 3x over a period of up to 10 years for you to make that payment back into Uncap. I know once the return on investment is made, Mary Katenge here will have no further payment obligation, and she will not only have recouped her equity ownership, but she'd have grown her business because, again, keyword growth, right? And then I'll hand over back to Francisca to really show us what this looks like in practice.
Thank you. And just like one more point before I go on the next slide. So what do these 3x mean? So what it means is that we get 10% in Mary's company in the beginning. And by now, we already are so convinced that basically of her as a founder and the business model, that we're really sure that over the next 10 years, her business will be 3 times more valuable than it is now. So we're only basically giving her back her 10% at a price that is 3 times higher. So that's basically, this multiple speaks about how we're expecting your company to grow and what it means for the value of the company. And this ties back to like the 10x I mentioned before, where many kind of like typical VC investors expect your company to be 10 times more valuable over a couple of years, not 10 years, but usually less than that. So this is how it would look like in practice with Mary's investment. So in 2022, for example, she gets the $25,000 investment. At the same time, she transfers a 10% stake to us. Then she starts paying back on a monthly basis. And you can see that kind of like this is now yearly. Her revenues are slowly growing, and she always pays back 5% of her monthly revenues to us. For her, she's kind of like growing probably at a rate of like, let's say 20 to 40% per year. So it takes her, in this case, 10 years until she's able to pay back the 3x. After 10 years, she's done with her revenue payments, and we are basically transferring back the 10% of equity to her, so she regains ownership. This, of course, can look very different depending on how your company grows. It could also be, and I'm showing that now on the next slide, that there will be months where maybe your revenues are very, very small or actually zero. In those months, you're not paying back anything at all. And then there are months where the kind of like your revenues go up, and then you're paying back more than that. So that's, I think, the beauty of the revenue-based financing model, also compared to a more traditional loan, is that it is really adapted to your situation. So depending on how your business is going, I think especially for agriculture companies that have like a high level of seasonality in their revenues, this is quite important because it means you don't have any obligation to pay in months where you're not earning anything. Yeah, I think we've gone through the slides. I think there was a lot of content actually. We really tried to make it as kind of like as clear as possible. But now really is your chance to ask questions. Cool, thank you everyone. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for joining in, learning more about revenue-based financing. I wish you all a fantastic afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. And I hope to see you next week. Also, thank you, Esther. Thank you for...
I just want to remind everybody that we're 15 days away from closing applications. So get started if you haven't gotten started. And if you're in between the application, just make sure to complete it. Yeah, 15 days. So get to it. Thank you all.
That's a good point. Just to add on that, I'm not sure if you know that, but we want to fund at least 100 entrepreneurs. So if you're questioning whether you have a chance to get funding, like 100 entrepreneurs is quite a lot. So please put in your application, and we can't wait to receive it, to fund you guys and to work with you going forward. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.